Guiding Bright Minds. Guiding Bright Minds is the host of this webinar, and we have a webinar series that happens every 2 weeks. This is number 6. We launched them right before the beginning of the year. This webinar that you're attending today is Parenting to Foster Independence in Your Diverse Learner, and our guest speaker is Elaine Taylor-Klause. And so again, before handing it over to Elaine, I want to give you some background information on Guiding Bright Minds. So Guiding Bright Minds really stems from a lot of different events. So I grew up with dyslexia that was diagnosed in the 5th grade and undiagnosed ADHD until an adult. So needless to say, I'm an outside of the box learner and thinker. If you think about school about 40 some years ago, let alone today, school was really difficult for me. Teachers didn't understand how to connect with me or get me to engage, and I didn't understand how to engage with them. Making friends and keeping friends was even more challenging, I think, than school. In a nutshell, I lacked the confidence, the self-esteem, and the belief in myself. And frankly, I knew where all my weaknesses were because teachers pointed them out to me. Sometimes my parents pointed them out to me. And there wasn't a whole lot of focus on my strengths. So in a nutshell, I didn't feel very smart. Today, I know that my dyslexia and ADHD are actually my superpowers. I think, I like to say, I think more things before breakfast than many people think all day long. Needless to say, my ideas, my thoughts, they're very often outside of the box. And I know how to express my ideas, but executing them, that's a whole different story. So I was inspired 17 years ago to start Results Learning, an academic coaching, professional development organization, and we're focused around ADHD, executive functioning deficit, and dyslexia, and we're still helping students today. Through that experience and my own experience, I realized there's so many students who feel very similar to the way I did growing up. Yeah. So ultimately today, my wife of 20 years and I, we're raising an incredible child of our own who has ADHD, sensory challenges, and is absolutely an incredible outside-the-box learner and thinker. So all these experiences led my wife and I to find Guiding Bright Minds. So Guiding Bright Minds is a community meant for parents who have children that are diverse and neurodiverse learners. At Guiding Bright Minds, we believe that all children who learn differently have incredible strengths and talents that we like to call superpowers. We believe that through accessing children's superpowers and putting an emphasis on their strengths, that these children will become incredible and they're going to build confidence and self-esteem and skills to be our next generation of contributors and leaders. So exactly what is Guiding Bright Minds and how can we help today? Well, we're a single place where parents can go to find information on learning differences, explore your children's superpowers, and connect with screened and trusted professionals in schools who serve our amazing kids. Our organization and the professionals in our community are here to guide you on your path to addressing your child's needs and accessing their incredible and hidden strengths and superpowers. So my wife, Tiffany, and I, we quietly launched Guiding Bright Minds back in November, and we're working to make this a destination for all parents and people supporting and raising diverse learners and thinkers. So we're on the ground floor of this effort, and we want to build it for you and with you as a community who believes that diverse learners are incredible. So I'm going to include a link to Guiding Bright Minds, our website, as well as a sign up for our newsletter in the chat. And I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter as you'll receive invitations to our webinars that we host every 2 weeks, our new videos and blogs and articles all around focused on raising and supporting diverse and neurodiverse learners. And of course, we're going to send you a recording of this webinar and a link to Guiding Bright Minds as a follow-up to today's topic. So we also encourage you to consider becoming a member. It's free to become a member of our community at Guiding Bright Minds. And ultimately our webinar topics, basically they come from you. They come from all the feedback we get from our community. Many parents tell us their frustrations, their concerns, their challenges in raising diverse learners. And so that really brings me to the topic of our next webinar, which is actually March 10th at 12 o'clock, so 1 week from today. And the topic of that webinar is when your child says, "I hate you." So I know it's difficult to hear these words. And our guest speaker, Craig Nippenberg, he's going to provide 5 effective strategies to relate to your child and gain an understanding of the words, I hate you. He feels that these words and other destructive behaviors are often coded messages for other emotions. So if this next webinar isn't a fit for you, please pass this along to somebody who can benefit from this webinar and learn from it. So that brings me to our topic today. Our format's going to be a live presentation from Elaine for about 30 minutes, and we're going to follow that up with a Q&A. Also, Elaine is happy to kind of answer questions and take cues through our chat today, so feel free to post your questions or methods in the chat, and then when we get to the formal Q&A, I'll ask you to move to that Q&A section and put your questions there. So with that, I want to introduce you to our guest speaker, Elaine Taylor-Klause. 2 decades ago, Elaine Taylor-Klause described herself as an overwhelmed, anxious, stay-at-home mom with 3 complex kids. A fierce advocate, she discovered there was plenty of support out there for her kids, but virtually nothing in the way of support for her. As her own learning and attention challenges were diagnosed at the age of 40, she realized that helping her family needed to start with herself. She trained as a coach to provide support for parents like her. Now, 10 years later, Elaine's the co-founder and CEO of ImpactParents.com, the largest and most innovative online support resource for parents of complex kids in the world, serving parents, and this blew me away. She serves parents on 6 continents in more than 100 countries. She's also the author of 2 books, including the recent #1 release, The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids with ADHD, Anxiety, and More. They say it's a typical parenting book for kids who are not so typical. So Impact Parents is a virtual platform that provides affordable and accessible support, training, and coaching to parents and professionals. So for that, I'm going to hand it over to Elaine. And again, thank you so much for being here, Elaine, to speak on the topic of parenting to foster independence in your diverse learner. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you, Kyle. Yeah. I'm thrilled to be here. Love what y'all are about, what you're doing as a mom of 3 complex kids and learners, and it's what it's all about, right? Is we just got to keep making it available. And I'm loving the topic for your next speaker. I just got to say, my theory is if your kid doesn't occasionally say I hate you, then you're probably not doing it right. So to me, sometimes, not always, but it's often a sign of success. So I am going to share my screen, and I would like your help to make sure that this is working, if I may. Did we land where you can see, hopefully?
No,
nope.
I'm able to see.
This is that same problem we had before. So, oh, I know what it is.
Great.
Now I know how to, I realize I now know what to do.
Okay.
Now, I got to get it
Elaine
there
and I were
first.
talking
Now,
about
is that it?
Every day. That's it. You got it.
Awesome. Okay. So, and as Kyle said, feel free to throw something in the chat if there's something you want me to respond to while we're talking. Otherwise, use the Q&A box for the questions so that Kyle can sort of capture those for the conversation at the end. Okay. So we're going to talk about parenting to foster independence in your diverse learner. Okay. All of you who are here know already the truth that raising complex kids is different. Our kids don't fit into the guidebook that everybody else's kids. I hear that there are neurotypical kids out there. I haven't met any, but I understand that they're there, right? So our kids are different. They're quirky, they're smart, they're complicated, they're sensitive, they're emotional, they're all these things. And that's a different experience. This is my quirky family. This was several years ago. The blonde in the middle is now married, so it's a few years back. I need to update the picture. Right. But this is what, our families, they clean up nice, right? They look really good. This was done on a movie set when my eldest was filming a movie, like, doing great. And this is what it looked like to the outside world. And this is what it felt like inside. Right? For many raising complex kids, this is what our home life feels like. Sometimes this is what the inside of our head feels like. For a lot of our kids, this is what the inside of our head feels like. There's lots of great stuff in there, but we have a hard time accessing it sometimes, right? So understanding that just because it's messy doesn't mean it's miserable, but part of what this is all about is trying to create some order out of the chaos and find a path to have it feel as good on the outside as it sometimes looks. So there are 6 key challenge areas that Diane Dempster is the co-founder of Impact Parents with me. And we identified many, many years ago that these are kind of the 6 areas that families tend to be struggling with in the various challenges we have. And it doesn't matter whether your kid has a learning disability or sensory processing, ADHD, anxiety, it really doesn't matter what it is that makes them complex. When they're complex, it impacts all aspects of our lives, right? It impacts their ability to organize or our ability to organize, or sometimes both, because let's be honest, these kids, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Many of us are dealing with a lot of the same issues our kids have dealt with. Maybe we've compensated as adults and we figured out how to get a handle on it. Maybe we haven't, but the world is more complicated now for them than it was for us when we were that age, and so it's more imperative, I think, to help our kids get a handle on it sooner than we did. So some of the 6 areas: organization is a biggie. Emotional intensity is a biggie. And again, for them or for us, sometimes that's screaming and yelling, sometimes it's crying, sometimes it's shyness or hiding. It can show up in lots of ways. Logistics is what my husband and I used to call troop movements, right? This is the getting them out of the door on time, getting the homework done, getting the dinner on the table. That's much more difficult for our complex families. The relationships are impacted. Sometimes it's our siblings with each other, sometimes it's relationships with our extended families, sometimes it's relationships with us. And then, of course, the obvious, school and work, whether we're adults struggling with work issues or kids dealing with school-related challenges. And then the one that I think gets left out all too often is the impact on the parents and on the family. And I think that we keep ourselves as parents, we get so fixated and focused on our kids and what's going on with them and getting a diagnosis and getting accommodations and getting remediation that we neglect to pay attention to how it makes us feel and how it changes the dynamic for us as a parent, for our relationships as a couple, for sibling dynamics. We really kind of don't put enough emphasis on it, and it's really important. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is really addressing this issue in particular. Yes, it's going to help with logistics and organization and emotional management and all of that. And at the end of the day, you start the day with the impact on you. We often say, if you don't know where to focus, lean into relationships and pay attention to self-care, because your ability to support your kids to the extent that they need support will depend completely on your ability to take care of yourself. And as parents, we have a tendency to give and give and give until we give ourselves away. And at the end of the day, that doesn't really serve anyone.
That's so true.
So again, early on, as Diane started and I started working on this, we discovered that there were some clear parent styles that we recognize. How do parents deal with these issues? There's Sue the Supermom and Lost Lois. I was kind of a combination of Lost Lois and Maxed Out Maxine. Diane was Angry Ann and Fix It Fran, right? And so these are all kind of common scenarios. As we've gone along over the years, we've articulated and identified a number of parent archetypes, you might say, the ways that parents respond to these issues. We have anxious Ava, we have playful dad, we have defensive Drew, we have, nagging Nan. So there's lots and lots of different ways that we as parents address the challenges or respond to, let me say it differently, the ways that we react to the challenges we're facing instead of respond, right? So I want to capture in the chat for a minute, if you will, type in, how do you tend to respond? And you don't have to use our fun names. I'll tell you this, the description of all of these is in the new book, The Essential Guide. And it was a lot of fun to sort of really try to articulate who are all these parents and how are they showing up. But I'd love to see if you capture in the chat, how do you tend to respond to the complex issues in your family? Do you tend to try to be super mom? Do you tend to avoid it? Do you get angry? And this is for moms or dad, what kinds of things show up? So I see overly concerned, maxed out, stressed, and angry, right? Anne's a super mom. Ignore and direct for too long and then explode. Research and nag, right? That research and nag, research and nag, research, that one we see a lot, right? If you're still on the internet at 2 o'clock in the morning again, that may be doing a little bit more, all of them. Super mom juggling everything. So being aware of how this is impacting, I think, us is, I think, really important. Hang on, there we go. And what I really want to focus in on today is that your parenting approach matters when you're raising these complex kids. Again, we have this tendency to make it all about them. And really, it's all about us. And when we manage our approach and we manage our energy or our reactivity, that shifts the dynamic in the home. The other major concept I want to introduce is that their ownership is the key to their success. So when we become super mom and trying to control everything and make sure it happens, and as I used to call it, dragging them, kicking and screaming to their own success, right? At the end of the day, their ownership is the key to their success. And so part of our challenge is to begin to transfer ownership incrementally. And it's a slow, steady process. We need to start letting go of the reins and handing them the reins a little bit at a time. But we have to choose to do that in order for them to take on ownership. I like to see it, for those of you who come from a professional world, I like to see this as onboarding our kids to adulthood. When we onboard a new employee, when we bring somebody in new to a company, we take some time to train them, to educate them, to enlighten them about our processes, and then we give them time to practice. We don't expect them to get it all at once. And it's just like that with our kids. We really need to give them time to practice and get a handle on things one step before we introduce the next step. When we do this, we foster resilience. We can inspire kids to overcome the obstacles that they're facing. We help them develop their self-awareness. And this is the kicker, y'all. We teach them to ask for and accept help. And one of the biggest complaints we get from parents is, my kid won't let me help them. And if your kid isn't letting you help them, that's actually more about you than about them. And that's about the approach that you're taking that's a little bit more controlling than they're ready for. And this process of incrementally handing over the reins actually teaches them to ask for and accept help. And we call this the coach approach. So there are a lot of different philosophies. What we're talking about today is called behavior therapy training for parents. The recommended treatment for your kids is for you as a parent to get behavior therapy training, to learn behavior management strategies, to change your mindset, to learn tips, to get some feedback on how to change it. That's what we teach. As Kyle was mentioning, our program is called Sanity School, and it's all based in the coach approach. Some programs come from different therapeutic models. Ours comes from the model of coaching. And the fundamental principle of coaching is that perspective changes outcomes. When we shift our perspective, we actually change what's possible from there. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but that old expression, if you can or you can't, you're right. If you believe you can or you can't, you're right. When we shift a perspective on something, the way that we respond or the way that our kids respond is going to change, and the outcomes are going to change. That's the nature of how our brains work. We often talk about parenting from inspiration instead of desperation. Very, very often parents come to us with a sense of desperation. It's a word I commonly hear. We do something called sanity sessions where I'll spend 15 minutes just kind of getting a sense of what's going on with the family and see how we can help the parents or help the family. And inevitably, at least probably 20-30% of people will tell me they're desperate. They feel desperate. Well, desperation has an energy to it that kids will feel. And when you feel desperate, your kids are going to feel desperate. You're not going to think they can do anything. They're not going to think they can do anything. And that's going to condition the environment and how they respond. When you parent from inspiration, as Kyle was talking about, from a strength-based approach, when you choose to focus on what's possible instead of what's broken, they begin to do the same thing because they're going to take their lead from you. So if you learn nothing else from me today, but this concept, perspective changes outcomes, it's the most fundamental piece to coaching and the most fundamental way to begin to change the dynamic in your home or improve the dynamic with your kids. So here's the other concept I want to play with you. Before I go, I'm going to teach you a strategy, or not a strategy, but a technique that I think is really helpful. What I want to say is in this notion of perspective, is one of the things that we parents have to do, not have to do, choose to do, to let go of that desperation and move into a place of inspiration, is to choose a perspective that says, up until now. The 3 words that can change your life are up until now. Up until now, you did the best you could with what you had to work with the information that was available to you, with the resources that were available to you. You've done what you could do to be the best parent you could be for your complex kid. From here forward, at this moment, from today forward, you're going to have different information and you're going to be able to make different choices. And it's up to you how you'd want to handle it. And I want to invite you not to beat yourself up for what you have or haven't done in the past, but to accept that that's where you were up until now. And there's nothing you can do to change anything that's happened in the past. It's all in the past. It's done. But there's a huge amount of power for you to change what happens from here forward, moving forward. That is in your realm of influence and in your sphere of control. Maybe not always control, but you can definitely influence it, right? So up until now, when you shift your perspective, you change your outcomes. Up until now is in the past. From here forward, you can make a huge difference. So when you adjust your approach, you meet your kids where they are. And as you begin to learn to do that, you can begin to empower them and foster their independence, raise their self-awareness, all those things that I mentioned earlier. So how do we do that? We do this with something called the impact model. And I told Kyle earlier that we teach a class called Sanity School. We've been teaching it now since 2015. It's usually an on-demand class, and we are reteaching it starting tonight for the next 6 weeks, live, virtually, of course. And we're so excited because it's kind of the new and improved, updated version of Sanity School, and it starts tonight. So what I decided I was going to do for you guys today is to teach you one of the key concepts that we're now teaching in Sanity School, that we'll be teaching tonight. And it's kind of a great concept that goes throughout our course. So this is the model that we teach. I'm not going to go into this in detail today. That would take way too long. But this is the methodology that we teach parents to use to tackle any complex situation. It's super, super simple, and it's the simplicity of it that makes it so easy to use. The context for that model is what we call the 4 phases of empowerment. And this is what I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes with you, 5-10 minutes with you about, okay? The idea here is that there are 4 phases that we parents need to go through necessarily when we are parenting kids to onboard them to their adulthood, right? And we all know phase 1, we start there, everybody starts there. Phase 2 is collaborate, phase 3 is support, and phase 4 is champion. We all know phase 1 and we all want to end up at phase 4, right? And so a lot of us, as our kids get older, we bounce back and forth between 1 and 4. We control, and then we go to, and we say, okay, you do it. And what our kids need from us more than anything, most of the time that we're parenting them, is for us to be dancing between phases 2 and 3. So I'm going to go into them in detail, and then we'll talk about them again at the end, okay? So phase 1 is the one you're all familiar with. This is the direct phase. This is when we tell them what's going on and we motivate them and help them find their motivation. So it might be tonight you have math and history homework. Why don't you have a snack, do your homework before dinner, and then we can play a game later. So we're telling them what to do, when to do it, It's still theirs, but we're still holding the agenda, and we're even holding the agenda of the motivation. Then we can play a game later, right? So we are very much in ownership of the agenda in this phase. All of us start here necessarily. The problem is many of us stall out here, particularly if we have complex kids, because we worry they're not going to achieve it on their own. And so we continue to control longer than they need us to. And the game here is to begin to move into the collaboration phase, where we are not controlling as much as we are starting to share ownership with them. And we're not going to do this in all areas. We're going to begin to look for ways to collaborate with them, to empower them to begin to feel ownership of what they're responsible for. So the focus here is to begin to share the agenda, to motivate them to have a sense of ownership, and to model organization. So here's how the language shifts. There's more questions in phase 2. We might say, here are the times you have free to do your homework. Not, why don't you do it right after dinner, but here are the times available. Are you clear about what needs to be done, or would it help for us to go over it? When and where do you want to do it? Notice the choice in there. Can I help you plan out anything? Notice the collaboration and the modeling of organization. How will you reward yourself when you are done? Right, so I'm not telling you we get to play a game. I'm asking you to begin to seek reward and motivation, and find something to celebrate for yourself with it. So the word you shows up here, questions show up here, and you're beginning to have a shared sense of ownership and agenda, right? Phase 3 is support. Now phase 3, this is where we all think we should be with teenagers. And what I'll tell you, I guess 2 things I'll say about all of these is that it has nothing to do with the age of your child. None of this has anything to do with the age of your child. It has to do with your child's readiness for independence in a particular area. So you may have a kid who is ready for you to be in phase 3 with them when it comes to getting ready for soccer practice, but still needs you to be in phase 1 when it comes to getting math homework done. So it's not about their chronological age, it's about their readiness for taking ownership. So in phase 3, the focus here is supporting their ownership and encouraging them to begin to ask for and identify the help they need. So you're no longer holding the agenda that they get their homework done. Now you're holding the agenda of how can I support them while they own the agenda of getting their homework done. So it may sound something like this. It seems like you're on top of things. Can we talk about it for a minute? So notice there I'm asking permission. I'm not forcing my advice or ownership or control. I'm asking them, can I participate with them? What's your plan? What help do you think you might need? Or we might say, oftentimes this is the phase where we say, what can I do to help, right? Who might be helpful for you? Is there anything I can do to support you? So this might be a kid who's got it and who might need some help identifying what resources they need, or who they might go to ask for help. Or if you got a kid who's pretty independent most of the time and it's exams, you might say, can I make sure you got some snacks in time for exams? Can I make sure you got some protein going? What can I do to help you when I know the load is getting harder? So phase 3 is really about allowing them to have a sense of ownership, but still checking in, knowing they're not alone, and reminding them that asking for help is an important part of being successful. Phase 4 is championing. The focus here is empowerment, celebration, troubleshooting. This is most of us, our kids aren't going to get here very often until they're well out of our house, sometimes not even until well into their 20s. Remember, these kids struggle with executive function. They have a developmental delay in that part of their brain. And so they're not, I often say to my kids, you're not fully cooked until your mid-20s, if not your late 20s, right? So in the champion phase, you're asking, how's it going? I hope you're feeling good about or proud about how you're handling things. What's working for you? What are you celebrating? What are you struggling with? Will you let me know if you want help in any way? So we're still there for them, but we have really shifted to a trusted advisor role. You're no longer actively in engagement. I have a married child who's 26, their partner is 32. I'm still very actively involved in their lives, but for the most part, my job is champion. Occasionally, we still go back into phase 3 because there's something they may need some help with, you know. But for the most part, my job is to stay in this place and stay available to them. So the focus here on these 4 stages or phases is really about the adult's role, not about the kid. And we have this tendency to look at it and say, well, but he's ready. He's in phase 2. No, he's wherever he is, or she's wherever she is. And wherever they are, our job is to figure out what level of support and encouragement they need to move them to the next level of independence. So we've called this a lot of things. We don't have a good name for this system yet. I call it the 4 stages of empowerment. We've talked about the 4 stages of independence, the adult's role. Kyle, if your crew wants to give us a name for this, we would take it. But the fundamental piece here is to know that we're constantly dancing back and forth between these phases. There's not a linear line here. Except for the one thing we should always be doing is looking for the next place where we can step out of direction and into collaboration, and looking for the next place where we can step out of collaboration and into support, right? So I'm going to stop. I'm a coach, and so as coaches, we always check in and help people extract what they're learning from whatever we're doing. So I want you to ask yourself these final 4 questions, and feel free to throw it in the chat. I don't know what just happened. Okay. The first question is, what did I focus on or pay most attention to today? I know what I was talking about, but what were you thinking about? Was it a particular child? Was it a particular family dynamic? What had your attention? So capture that for yourself first. And then the second question is, what's my clarity or takeaway? What's your insight from today? What's one thing you're taking away? We often take, copious notes, and then we don't know what we got from it. So I want you to really think about, what's the insight? What's the aha for you from today? What's 1 or 2 things you've taken away where you kind of go, oh, that's going to shift. There's a shift that's going to come from me from that. What's the awareness? And do please capture it in the chat. The third question, we call these our final 3 questions, or final 4 questions. We do this at the end of every training program. We do this at the end of every one of our group coaching calls, even most of our private coaching. The third question is, what's a realistic action step for me to take? What's one action you might want to commit to based on your insights from today? And the fourth question is probably the most important and the one that so many people skip. And that's, how can I set myself up for success with this action? It's great to say I'm going to go join a gym, but if you don't schedule time to work out, find a workout buddy, put it on your calendar, have a pair of shoes, whatever it is you need to be successful with that gym, you're not going to use the gym. So whenever you set yourself up, whenever you set an intention or a commitment to do something, you always want to figure out what will help me be accountable or successful with it. Is there an accountability buddy that I might work with? Like, do I need to get some training on this? What will help me be successful? Can I go back to the collaboration slide and speak a bit more about how to transition from directing? Yeah, I'm happy to. So again, directing is something we all know, right? We're good at it. Most of us are excellent at it. And part of what happens with complex kids is it becomes easy to let someone else direct. It's really easy. It's almost like a learned helplessness can develop. Why should I take ownership? Why should I do it if I know? Why should I care about my grades if I know my mom's going to? Why should I figure out how to make sure I take the trash out at the right time if I know they're going to remind me, right? So collaboration is about beginning to help them see it as theirs instead of us always being the one making sure it gets done. So the shift here might be, when do you want to do it? You might even, another question might be, if you're going to wait and take a break before you do your homework, how will you remember to get started? Instead of you saying, okay, well, I'll come remind you at 5 o'clock, you want to ask them a question that prompts them to figure out, our kids need us to focus more on process instead of outcome. And we have a tendency to be really focused on, did you get it done? And what our kids need from us is to be constantly walking them through the exercise, the process of thinking through how they might get it done, how they might help themselves remember to get it done. Process over outcome. Again, all of this is stuff that we teach in Sanity School in much greater detail, but process over outcome is essential, and we tend to forget it. So collaboration is about beginning to shed light on the process you're using to figure out stuff and inviting your kids into that conversation so that they're not surprised, they actually understand what's happening. And I see, and this is a question, what if they don't follow through with the process? Then that's a great opportunity to look at it and say, okay, what worked? What didn't work? What will we do differently? It's a fair assumption that it's not going to work right the first time. Most of the time we put a new system in place, probably 80% likelihood that it won't work right the first time. So if we start with that assumption and know that we're going to check in a couple of days and then debrief and kind of go, okay, what worked? What didn't work? What are we going to do differently? Then we're really setting ourselves up for success to learn from it instead of just creating an environment that makes it wrong to make mistakes. One of the things, again, a lot of this stuff we talk about in much greater detail in Sanity School, but we often create an environment that makes it not okay to make mistakes. And we don't realize we're doing it. There's this kind of perfectionism. Every time our kid puts something in a dishwasher and then we change it, rearrange it, or they fold a shirt and then we refold it, we're giving the message that we expect a level of perfectionism that at some point they're going to start saying, why should I bother? I'm never going to do it good enough. Why should I bother? And so if they don't follow through with the process, what if that were okay and an opportunity to learn from it? We call it failing forward instead of only being a problem that they didn't. And that's the shift in mindset. When I talked about perspective shift earlier, that's really the shift that we're talking about. So I see there are questions coming. So let me just move to that last piece because I want to disclose that all the information I'm sharing with you today comes from the class that we happenstance are teaching tonight called Sanity School. Tonight's Sanity School Live. And it comes from the book that Kyle mentioned earlier, The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kid, which is the companion guide to Sanity School. So we're going to take some Q&A. I'm going to just leave this slide up for just a minute, Kyle, so that you can explain to them about Sanity School and the coupon code and how that works with the link.
Yeah, and if you are interested in Sanity School, and I've experienced some of it myself, it is so helpful, and you got a little taste of it today. You can go ahead and use this code, and we'll send this out following the webinar as well, to go ahead and subscribe to Sanity School, whether you want to take it live or get the recorded version. I think, is that correct, Elaine?
Well, right now, I think this is, I don't know what your links to, so that's a fair question. We're not, this coupon code is only really being used by you. So we know if people come in, we'll assume that that's yours. So they can go to live.sanityschool.com and use the coupon code 150 off live. And it is case sensitive, and that'll save you $150. The class is a 6-week class. It starts tonight. It's offered twice a week so that there are 2 different time slots for people in different time zones or because of life work stuff. It's all recorded. So of course, if you miss a class, and you probably will, it'll be available to you to listen to the recording. And we'll be doing it every Wednesday night and Thursday afternoon for the next 6 weeks. Not too late to sign up now, not too late to sign up tomorrow, whenever there's always access to it. And if you have any questions, just email us, email the team at impactparents.com, and we'll let you know. And Kyle, you and I can, before you send out, I'll make sure you've got a proper link for the live version, or maybe a link for both. I would encourage you, while we're doing it live, to take it live. It's a rare treat. We haven't done it live in 4 years. So it's a really great opportunity to really interact with us.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing it with your community.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's 150 off live between the 0 and it's 150 and then a capital OFF capital LIVE. Sorry, it is a little confusing.
All right, awesome.
And I
Um,
think that's it. Let's move to Q&A.
yeah, and I just wanted to add something, if
Yeah,
that's okay, Elaine, is you
please.
mentioned, when we were talking about, when you were just talking about collaborating, and a parent had a question, well, what if they don't follow through the process? Well, there's research that shows for the average adult, it takes 66 repetitions, consistent repetitions over consistent days to actually build a new habit or a skill. And we know for kids that are kind of those complex kids, it can take a lot longer, even up to 254 repetitions, research shows us. So when you implement some of the things that Elaine was talking about, you definitely, as she mentioned, you definitely have to have patience and kindness and caring, and knowing that your children are going to learn, have that opportunity to learn through failure, and you need to learn with them. It's kind of a collaborative process, right? And be patient, because it will come when you try these things. And if you see your kids buy in, when you introduce it, or occasionally, that's a good sign that it's going to work, but it's going to take time and patience. So stick with it.
Well, that kind of ties into this other question that Zana's asking, which is, she said, do you find that creating a schedule for the day created with the child helps with moving toward independence, or keeps the child stuck and relying on an external source of organization? And so there's so many things I want to say to that. Of course, it depends on the child and the age of the child and the development of the child and all of those things. But what Kyle was just saying is how important it is to be in process with our kids. And so, yes, creating a schedule with a child is essential to their buy-in and ownership of it. It should not keep them stuck on relying on an external source, because if you're creating it with them, they should have an ownership of it. And what we want to teach them is that life is more successful when we learn how to put systems in place for ourselves to manage ourselves. We have kids who need to learn to self-regulate and self-manage. So every opportunity we have to help them practice that is key. The catch is to make sure that it's working, help them see and assess whether it's working for them, and to tweak it and revise it if it's not. We talk about, I'm going to go back and show you for a second. This is when we teach Sanity School, we teach the first module introduces the overview of the model, and then each of the 4 modules after it introduces each of the planning areas. But so the idea is that when you take aim and you collect information, and then you plan to put a strategy in place like you're talking about, if you create a schedule with the child for how the day is going to go, that's a plan. Then you take action, right? The next step that we tend to miss that's so important is what we call rinse and repeat. Is you want to go back and look and say, well, what part of it worked? What part didn't work? What do we want to do differently? Do we want to take aim on the same thing again and try to keep going with it till we make it work? Or did we really hit it well enough off and it's time to take aim on something else? But really understanding that rinse and repeat is a critical part of any process that we create. That's the piece I think we tend to miss, because we're moving fast, and it's like, if it makes sense to our logical brain, we don't realize, we forget that these kids are actually kids. Their brains aren't fully cooked yet, their frontal lobe's not fully developed. And so we have to slow down a little bit and help them learn from it, so that they can really, as Kyle was saying, get it into their memory, get it into become a habit. So let me stop the slides. And let's just be present with you guys to what questions are coming up for you. How can I help?
And go ahead and if you would please, everybody shift to the Q&A, and go ahead and put additional questions you have for Elaine in the Q&A, please. That'll help us keep track and make sure we get it answered. So
Awesome.
Here's one question. How much is the Sanity course?
Oh, Sanity School. So generally, Sanity School Live is a little bit more, because we're doing it live. It's usually $497, but I'm giving you a coupon code of a discount of $150. So you should be able to get it for less than $350. And what that brings you is 6 live courses that you'll have the recordings for forever, plus 3 months of support. So with that 3 months, you'll have access twice a month. We do something called office hours where you can call in and talk to us and ask questions and get support. Amazing community. There's lots of additional resources that come with it, and you have access to all of those resources for 3 months. So it's about $100 a month is what it works out to with your discount code.
Awesome. So Elaine, I had a question. So you mentioned, and we just talked about focusing on the process. I know a lot of us, and not only myself, but many parents get caught up on, we're going through the process, but ultimately it's hard to let go of that outcome that we want.
Yeah.
And when we do it time and time again and don't get out that outcome, how do we do you have any advice on how to step back or what we can do to kind of refocus ourselves?
So can you give me a more specific example?
Yeah.
Ground it a little bit more time and place for me.
Sure. So, for example, the morning routine with my son, I'll give you an example, right?
Great.
That is something that we've tried over and over again to help him become more independent in that. So we're not specifically saying, hey, we need to get out the door at 8 o'clock. That's our end goal.
Right.
You have to do this and this and this. We're kind of doing that step too, right? That collaboration to allow him to get out on time. And sometimes we get focused on the end goal. Get out the door at 8 o'clock. Because if you're not out the door, you're late, we're late, everything is off.
Right.
So do you have any advice in terms of how we can, for example, step back and say, how do we let go a little bit and get back a little bit to the process? And really
So a great example, great question. Tell me just how old he is again, remind me.
He's 7.
He's 7. Okay, so he's a little one.
Yeah, and I know parents have the same challenge with 14 and 16.
I was going to say 16-year-olds, yeah. I was just talking to a client about it yesterday. Okay, so my guess is if I were to go through the model with you, right, if I were to coach you around it, and our model is designed for us to coach you around or for you to begin to learn to coach yourself. Our goal is to teach you a strategy that you can do yourself, that you can apply to any challenge you're facing, right? So what's the change you want to see?
The change we want to see is our son going from one step to another without direction.
Okay, so you want him to improve transitions.
Yes.
Okay, so then we move into step 2 and we say, we collect information, we gather data, right? What you know about executive function and a 7-year-old with, if I recall, ADHD and sensory issues,
Yep.
maybe something, whatever, okay? Do you think it's a reasonable expectation that they can move from transition to transition to transition early in the morning before they've really gotten going on their day without some support?
Probably not.
Okay. So based on that, right? So remember I said rinse and repeat?
Yep.
You might say, okay, well, how do we try that? Or you might say, you know what? That might not be a realistic expectation. Let's take aim again. What if you were to take aim more specifically? What's one transition you might like to see him do more independently than he's able to do right now?
From breakfast to, in our house, it's the toilet.
Okay. Breakfast to the bathroom.
Yep.
Okay. And again, let's collect information. This may be more than you want to share. You up for this?
I'm up for it.
Okay. So what's going on in that dynamic? Is he rushing? Is he not rushing? Does he not like to be rushed? Like, what's happening? What do you know?
Yeah, he doesn't like to be rushed, and we do, at the time there is a bit of rush. Even when he gets down, to breakfast early, then breakfast takes longer.
Right, because he's enjoying it.
Exactly.
Right.
And then it's a rush. We got to get upstairs. You got to have your bathroom time. Otherwise, we're going to get out of the house late.
Okay.
So that's.
So he's coming downstairs to breakfast, then back up to the bathroom, and then back downstairs to get out the door.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So that might be one place to look, is whether that's a really good system, because you're probably losing him as soon as he goes back upstairs.
Yeah, at times. Yep.
Yep. Right. You got working memory issues involved. You got like distractions involved. So is there a bathroom on the floor where the kitchen is?
There is. There is,
So
yeah.
is there a reason he needs to go back upstairs?
He just likes to be, we're upstairs getting ready, so he just likes to be closer to us.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. So that's more information. So he wants to be with other people, right? So is he going downstairs by himself to have breakfast?
Yeah, he is. He's getting to the point where he's going downstairs. We're trying to walk him through what do you want to have for breakfast and what do you need to get out, because he wants to do it independently.
Okay, good.
Ultimately, we end up downstairs helping him, but he's starting to think through that process.
Great. So that may be that the place to take aim is to keep taking aim on the place that he's already got some buy-in and ownership, and really get that streamlined before you start taking aim on something else.
That's good.
Right. So what I would say is in this case, you could take aim on there's something structural I would encourage y'all to look at and say, is the back and forth actually becoming an obstacle, and is there another way to address that? But then really hone in on where he is, what he's doing, what's working, and then let him really learn from what's working so he can begin to apply it when you are able to say, do you think you're ready to take aim on the next thing? Right. And let him have some ownership in it, because what he's saying to you really is he's not ready for that level of disconnection from you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right. And he's 7 years old, and that's reasonable.
Yep.
Right. So what's your insight from that?
My insight is that we need to look at basically look at changing the structure of how we do it to help him be more successful in that transition.
Great. All right. So what's your commitment to action from here?
I am going to speak with my wife this evening.
Okay.
About what makes the most sense to change between the going downstairs, eating breakfast in the bathroom, so it can be smoother for him.
Okay. And how do you want to involve your son in that process?
Great question. Thank you for reminding me of that. Because you know what, I think we do that a lot, right? We come up with
we do. We decide for them, and then we can't understand why they don't think it's the most brilliant plan.
So brilliant in our mind. I think my wife and I will talk, and then we'll give my son a couple of options on what he thinks is going to be the best.
Great, brilliant. So that's a beautiful example of the collaboration phase, right? You're not telling him, you're giving him some choices, but you're not making it so wide open that he's going to come back to you and say, I don't know, because guess what? He doesn't know.
Yep.
Right. So
awesome.
Great. So thank you for that. It's a great example of how we use the model to really hone in on the change you're trying to see.
Perfect. We have another question. So I'm working towards collaboration and support and away from directing my 13-year-old during homework time. He's doing pretty good, but I notice that sometimes he rushes through some homework in order to get to the reward. Usually means he does the bare minimum to answer questions that should be more in depth. So she plummets back to directing and making him show her all the work. She doesn't want to push perfection in every single assignment, but she wants him to put in the right effort. How does she know how to let him, when and how does she let him turn in what he's got without her oversight?
So at 13, probably the answer is now, but there could be an interim stage, which is, and I say that, and I want to be careful, because I'm always saying to parents, so I don't want to do I don't want to break my own rule. We have to look at where he is developmentally, not chronologically. So 13 going on what? Is he 13 going on 14 in this case, or is he 13 going on 10 or 11 in this case? And what would you expect from a 10 or 11-year-old in that case, right? That's sort of the context to always look at it. In this case, I would probably start by asking him some questions if you're still checking in with him, but shift the check-in, the style of the check-in from you didn't do this and you didn't do this and you should have answered that more to, do you feel like you gave a thorough answer there? Do you feel like there might be anything more the teacher wants from you there? Ask some open-ended questions to get him to say, yeah, you're right, I didn't really, I kind of cut the corner here. And let him, and do that with him for a while, so that your check-ins are designed to coach him to self-manage instead of to direct him to self-manage. And then eventually you'll get to the point where you're able to say, do you feel like you're ready to do this independently without my input? Again, you're asking a question, and I know a lot of parents feel like I should be the one in charge and telling them, but if we want to onboard them to become adults, right, we have to empower them to begin to see it as theirs. And so at some point, you want him to to turn in and let the teacher be the one saying, that was slack, man, right? I'd much rather the teacher tell him that than you. What's the harm of a 13-year-old getting a C instead of a B, right? This isn't high school, this isn't college. Let him learn from the natural consequence of the system reinforcement instead of making sure he gets it right. Because if you make sure he's getting it right, he's not the one making sure he gets it right.
Great point. That's a great point. Thanks for answering that. Got one or two more questions I'll try and squeeze in.
I'm good.
What is a good strategy to collaborate with class assignments? My boys will completely ignore it till I check it, and it's a horrible cycle.
I just don't have enough detail to answer that question, except for to say, take Sanity School and learn the model, learn how to use this, or read the book. That this is about how you're communicating with your boys. And what we're talking about really here is shifting your style of communication from being more directive to being more collaborative and to being more open and to asking more questions. And it takes some time to learn. It's not easy to do. It's not hard to do, but we're old dogs and we need to retrain ourselves a little bit, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
What
So
else?
there was just a comment that in this person's school, the school won't enforce late work policies. So I'm assuming this parent has trouble enforcing that at home, that the homework actually needs to get done in a timely manner. So you have any thoughts on kind of that balance between a school that doesn't enforce the late policies and
So
parents?
if there's not an accountability from the system, then you might have a conversation with a kid and help them come up with a reward for themselves. Like, so what's in it for you to get it done? What's the cost when you don't? What's that? How does that, like, I'm tired of having these fights. Are you tired of having these fights? What can we do to make this different, right? And really invite them into the conversation, because sometimes kids need an external reward. You know, Diane tells a great story about her son getting his homework done with a bowl of ice cream as an incentive for himself, you know? I was just having this conversation with my 23-year-old about coming up with an external motivation because she didn't have a deadline and she was struggling with not having a deadline for something. And so she had to create something for herself so that it wasn't just lingering and always there, because that was more stressful, right?
Yep.
So this is about being in that conversation, but doing it from a matter-of-fact place of asking questions instead of from that tendency we have to judge with our hands on our hips, right? We're pretty good at doing that.
Yep.
And if we can stay open to them, we can bring them into their process more.
Awesome. Well, Elaine, thank you so much for being with us today and
My
taking
pleasure.
time on a day where you're going to do Sanity School Live and being with us and sharing a part of that with us, and really giving us some great things to think about. So as all of you go and move throughout your day, hopefully you'll take some of the tips and really strategies that Elaine shared with you and bring those home with you. And on behalf of Guiding Bright Minds, I want to thank everybody for being here today. Encourage you to go check out our guidingbrightminds.com website, as well as Sanity School with Elaine. So check those things out. In any way we can all be of resources, we want to be a resource for you. So feel free to reach out to Impact Parents or Guiding Bright Minds, and we're here for you. So thank you all very much for being here today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your days.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Really appreciate it.